I had just written the biggest check of my life. $68,000. Every penny of Walter's life insurance. Every dollar from selling our family home of 40 years in Cedar Grove, where I'd raised my children, where I'd hosted countless Christmas dinners, where I'd said goodbye to my beloved Walter just 8 months ago. There, I whispered, sliding the final payment across the kitchen table to my son David. The house is yours. Free and clear. David barely looked up from his phone, scrolling through work emails, even on a Saturday morning. His wife Jessica didn't even acknowledge my presence, too busy staging the perfect breakfast photo for her Instagram story, artfully arranged avocado toast and a coffee cup that had never been touched. I had moved in 6 months ago after Walter's funeral. The plan seemed so simple then, so full of promise. I'd help with the mortgage payments that were drowning David and Jessica. We'd have family dinners again, real conversations. I'd finally get to know 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Tyler better. Grandchildren who barely knew me because David had always been too busy for family visits. Those first few weeks had been magical. Emma would run to me every day after school, chattering about her friends and her art projects. Tyler would crawl into my lap during movie nights, something he'd never done before. I had felt useful again, needed, like I had a purpose beyond grieving. But something had changed in recent weeks. The warmth had evaporated. David barely spoke to me except when absolutely necessary. Jessica had started making pointed comments about personal space and family dynamics. "We need to talk," David said, his voice carrying that tone I had learned to dread, the same tone he'd used as a teenager when he was about to disappoint me. My coffee grew cold as I waited, watching my son pace in the hallway like a caged animal. As I sat waiting for this mysterious conversation, my mind drifted to Walter. How would he handle this situation? Walter, who had worked double shifts at the factory for 30 years so David could go to college. Walter, who had taught David to throw a baseball, to change a tire, to treat people with respect. "What would you do, sweetheart?" I whispered to his photograph on the mantelpiece. I remembered the day David had called me, panic in his voice. The construction company he worked for had lost 3 major contracts. Jessica's boutique was failing. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. Without hesitation, I had put our beloved home on the market. The house where I'd brought David home from the hospital, where I'd nursed him through chickenpox and helped him with algebra homework, where I'd slow dance with Walter in the kitchen just months before his heart attack. Family takes care of family, I told Walter's grave that day. It's what he would have done. I'd sold everything, Walter's tools, my grandmother's china, even my car to buy something more practical. The money from the house sale was enough to pay off David's mortgage completely, with a little left over for my own modest needs. But living with David and Jessica hadn't been the heartwarming reunion I had imagined. Jessica resented every suggestion, every offer to help. When I offered to teach Emma to bake cookies, Jessica snapped that she didn't want her daughter filling up on sugar. When I tried to help Tyler with his reading, Jessica said she preferred to handle her children's education herself. David seemed caught in the middle, but I noticed he never defended me. When Jessica made cutting remarks about different generations having different standards, David just stared at his plate. When Jessica complained about my old-fashioned cooking, David said nothing. Last week I had overheard Jessica on the phone with her sister. "I can't stand having her here, Rachel. She's always underfoot, always trying to parent my children. And the way she does things, it's like living with a museum curator. Everything has to be done her way." I had stood frozen in the hallway, a basket of freshly folded laundry in my arms, laundry I'd been doing to help ease Jessica's burden. The worst part wasn't Jessica's complaints. It was David's response. "I know, babe. Maybe we can figure something out soon." Figure something out. Like I was a problem to be solved. Not his mother who had just sacrificed everything for his family. "Mom, we've been thinking." David started, unable to meet my eyes. He was fidgeting with his wedding ring, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Now that the house is paid off, Jessica and I feel like we need our space back." My coffee cup trembled in my hands. The cup Emma had made me in art class, painted with crooked flowers and World's Best Grandma, in purple crayon. I don't understand, honey. Jessica finally spoke up, her voice sharp and rehearsed. We never planned on this being permanent, Margaret. The kids need their playroom back. We've had to store their toys in the garage. And honestly, she paused, looking around dismissively. We're young. We need our privacy. We need to live our own lives without feeling like we're being watched and judged all the time. Watched and judged? Jessica, I've only tried to help. I do the laundry. I cook dinner most nights. I help with the children's homework. That's exactly the problem, Jessica interrupted. We didn't ask for your help. We can manage our own household. I turned to my son, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition Walter and I had scrimped and saved for. David, is this really how you feel? David cleared his throat, still staring at the floor. Mom, you have to understand. We're grateful for what you did with the mortgage, we really are. But we got married to build our own family, our own traditions. It's been difficult, trying to establish our independence with you here. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Independence. As if my presence was somehow holding them back, rather than holding them up. But where will I go? My voice was barely a whisper. David shrugged, a gesture so casual it might as well have been a slap. There are nice senior communities around here, Mom. Sunset Manor has great reviews. You'll make friends your own age, have activities. You might actually enjoy it more than living with us. I looked around the living room where I'd spent Christmas morning with my grandchildren just weeks ago. Where Emma had proudly shown me every drawing from school, where Tyler had fallen asleep in my lap during movie nights, where I'd felt like I belonged to a family again. What about Emma and Tyler? I promised to help Emma with her science project, and Tyler is finally reading chapter books. They'll adjust, Jessica said coolly. Children are resilient. And frankly, Margaret, I think you've gotten a little too attached. They have parents. They don't need a third one. 30 days, I repeated to myself, carefully folding the sweater my grandson Tyler had picked out for my birthday. A soft blue cardigan with tiny flowers that he said reminded him of my garden back in Cedar Grove. They gave me 30 days. The words felt surreal. 30 days to find somewhere else to live. 30 days to pack up the fragments of the life I tried to rebuild. 30 days to say goodbye to the grandchildren I'd finally gotten to know. As I packed, I noticed something else that twisted the knife deeper. Jessica had already started redecorating. New curtains appeared overnight. Modern, geometric patterns that replaced the soft florals I had helped Emma pick out for the living room. Paint samples covered the kitchen counter, bold, contemporary colors that would erase every trace of the warm, homey atmosphere I had tried to create. They weren't just asking me to leave. They were erasing me, as if the past 6 months had never happened, as if my contributions to their family meant nothing. 3 nights later, I overheard Jessica on the phone again, this time with her mother. Oh, it's going to be such a relief, Mom. I can finally have the house I want. She had all these old-fashioned ideas about how things should be done. And the way she spoiled the kids. I couldn't discipline them properly with her constantly undermining me. I paused in the hallway, a basket of David's laundry in my arms. Undermining? When had I ever undermined Jessica's parenting? I remembered every interaction with my grandchildren. I'd been careful to ask Jessica's permission before any treats or special activities. I'd followed Jessica's rules about screen time and bedtime routines. The only thing I'd ever done was love them unconditionally and give them the attention they craved. The hardest part was telling Emma and Tyler. I had planned to wait until closer to my moving date, but Emma was too perceptive. Grandma, why are you putting your pictures in boxes? Emma asked, watching me carefully wrap a framed photo of Walter. My heart broke as I knelt down to Emma's level. Well, sweetheart, Grandma is going to be moving to a new house soon. But why? Did we do something wrong? Emma's eyes filled with tears. I promise I'll clean my room better, and I won't forget to feed the fish anymore. Tyler ran over and wrapped his small arms around my waist. Don't go, Grandma. I don't want you to live somewhere else. I pulled both children close, breathing in the scent of Emma's strawberry shampoo and Tyler's perpetual smell of playground dirt and adventure. You didn't do anything wrong, my darlings. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions, And your parents think it would be better if Grandma lived somewhere else. Emma immediately ran to David and Jessica, tears streaming down her face. Daddy, please don't make Grandma leave. She helps me with my math homework, and she tells the best bedtime stories. Tyler clung to Jessica's leg. Mommy, Grandma makes the best pancakes, and she lets me help in the garden. Can't she stay just a little longer? Jessica peeled Tyler's arms from her leg with barely concealed irritation. Kids, this is a grown-up decision. Grandma will be much happier in a place with people her own age. You'll still see her sometimes. Sometimes. The word hung in the air like a threat. But I had lived through worse betrayals than this. I'd buried my husband after 43 years of marriage. I'd raised an ungrateful son who seemed to have forgotten every value Walter and I had tried to instill in him. I'd survived the uncertainty of losing my own home and starting over at 72 years old. I was tougher than David and Jessica realized. And I was also smarter. That afternoon, I visited 3 real estate offices in the area. I wasn't just looking for a place to live. I was doing research. I'd learned a lot about property values and neighborhood dynamics during the sale of my own home and David's mortgage process. Mrs. Whitman, the market in your son's neighborhood is quite strong, the first agent explained, showing me comparable sales data. Properties there typically appreciate about 8% annually. It's a very desirable area for young families. I asked detailed questions about property taxes, homeowners association rules, and the demographics of the area. I learned that David's neighborhood was in the middle of a gentrification wave, with many older residents selling to young professionals. The house next door to your son's place, 1247 Maple Street, that's actually coming on the market next week, the agent mentioned casually. The Hendersons are moving to a retirement community in Florida. Lovely couple, been there for 35 years. My pulse quickened. The Henderson house. I chatted with Eleanor Henderson over the fence many times, admiring her rose garden, and sharing stories about our grandchildren. What kind of price range are they looking at? The Henderson house was a mirror image of David's, built in 1987 by the same developer. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a cozy kitchen with a breakfast nook, and a large backyard with mature oak trees. It needed some updating. The kitchen appliances were from the 1990s, and the carpet throughout showed 3 decades of family life, but the bones were solid. From the master bedroom window, I had a perfect view of David's backyard, where Emma's swing set sat, and where Tyler practiced soccer kicks against the fence. I could see the kitchen window where I'd spent countless hours cooking meals that had fed this family for 6 months. The Hendersons are motivated sellers, the realtor explained. They want to close quickly so they can get settled in Florida before the end of the month. They're asking $185,000, but they've indicated they'd consider a cash offer significantly below asking price. I did quick calculations in my head. I had about $75,000 left from the sale of my house, after paying David's mortgage. My monthly Social Security and Walter's pension would cover living expenses and taxes. If I could get the Henderson house for around $150,000. The next morning, I met with a loan officer at my bank. My credit was excellent, and I had no debt beyond the small car payment on my practical Honda Civic. The combination of my cash down payment and stable retirement income made me an attractive borrower. We could approve you for up to $200,000, Mrs. Whitman, the loan officer assured me. Would you like to make an offer on the property? I thought about Walter, about the values we'd shared, about the importance of family and loyalty and treating people with dignity. Then I thought about Jessica's cold dismissal, about David's casual shrug when asked where his own mother would live. Yes, I said firmly. I'd like to make an offer. As my final weeks in David's house ticked by, the atmosphere grew even more strained. Jessica had apparently decided that since I was leaving anyway, there was no point in maintaining even basic courtesy. Margaret, could you not make breakfast for the kids anymore? Jessica announced one morning, watching me flip pancakes while Emma and Tyler waited eagerly at the table. They're getting too used to all the sugar and home cooking. I prefer they eat healthy cereal. I looked at the organic blueberries I'd folded into the pancake batter, at Tyler's expectant face, at Emma's disappointed expression. Of course, I said quietly, turning off the stove. Emma and Tyler ate their bran flakes in confused silence while I cleaned up the pancake batter, scraping the uneaten food into the garbage disposal. Another small joy eliminated, another connection severed. When I tried to continue helping Tyler with his reading practice, Jessica intervened again. Actually, I think Tyler should focus on independence right now. Too much help isn't good for his development. Tyler clutched his chapter book, The Magic Tree House, and looked between his mother and grandmother with obvious distress. By the end of the second week, I had been effectively cut off from meaningful interaction with Emma and Tyler. Jessica monitored every conversation, redirected every attempt at connection, and made it clear that my input was neither wanted nor needed. I spent increasing amounts of time in my temporary bedroom, looking out the window at the life I was being systematically removed from. I watched David mow the lawn on the riding mower that Walter's insurance money had helped them afford. I watched Jessica host playdates in the backyard, telling other mothers how relieved she was to finally have our space back. But while Jessica was busy erasing me from their daily life, I was busy with my own plans. The Henderson house inspection had gone smoothly. My loan had been approved. The closing was scheduled for 2 days before my move-out deadline. I hadn't mentioned my house purchase to David or Jessica. When they asked about my moving plans, I simply said I'd found a nice place, and left it at that. On my final night in David's house, Jessica made one last gesture that crystallized everything I had learned about my son's wife, and about my son himself. I was cleaning up after dinner, a farewell meal I'd cooked despite Jessica's obvious irritation at the unnecessary fuss, when Jessica approached me with a small envelope. "Margaret, David and I wanted to give you this," Jessica said, her tone suggesting she was bestowing a great favor. Inside was a $100 gift card to Walmart and a card that read, "Thanks for your help with the house. Best wishes in your new home. David and Jessica." I stared at the gift card. $100. A tip. For sacrificing my life savings, my home, and 6 months of unpaid household labor. "Thank you," I said simply, tucking the gift card back into the envelope. "That's very thoughtful." But inside, something fundamental had crystallized. This wasn't just ingratitude. This was a complete failure to understand the value of what had been given and received. A failure to comprehend that love and sacrifice couldn't be repaid with gift cards and casual dismissal. That night, I sat on my bed surrounded by boxes, holding Walter's photograph. I tried sweetheart. I whispered. I really tried to be the family they needed. But maybe you were right when you used to say that respect has to be earned, not demanded. Walter had always been the pragmatist in our relationship. He'd warned me not to sacrifice too much for David, not to enable his selfishness. I had thought love would be enough to bridge any gap. Now I understood that Walter had been right about one thing. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is allowing them to experience the consequences of their choices. My moving day dawned bright and clear. I'd hired a small moving company, just enough for my bedroom furniture, Walter's recliner, and the boxes of belongings that represented a lifetime of memories. David helped load the truck with obvious reluctance, making a show of checking his watch and mentioning his golf plans for later. Jessica stayed inside, claiming she had too much to do to help with the move. "So where exactly is this new place, Mom?" David asked as we loaded the last box. I smiled mysteriously. "Oh, it's very close, honey. You'll see it soon enough." David shrugged, already distracted by a text message on his phone. "Well, I hope you'll be happy there." As the moving truck pulled away from 1245 Maple Street, I sat in my Honda Civic and took one last look at the house my sacrifice had saved. Through the kitchen window, I could see Jessica already rearranging the breakfast nook, erasing the last traces of my presence. 5 minutes later, David was inside getting ready for golf when he heard Jessica scream from the kitchen. "David, get in here now." David ran to the kitchen to find Jessica pointing out the window with a shaking finger. The moving truck that had just left their driveway was now parked in the driveway next door, and I was directing the movers toward the front door of 1247 Maple Street. "What the hell?" David breathed. I noticed David and Jessica's shocked faces in their kitchen window, and offered a cheerful wave, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The next morning, I was watering the potted plants on my new front porch when David came storming out of his house. Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing? I looked up from my geraniums with the patient expression I'd perfected during David's teenage years. Good morning, David. I'm watering my plants. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. Don't play dumb with me. You can't just move in next door. This is insane. I noticed Mrs. Patterson from across the street had paused her morning walk to watch the spectacle. Other neighbors were beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by David's raised voice. Actually, I can, I said calmly. I own this house now. The Hendersons were lovely to work with, very understanding when I explained that I wanted to stay close to my grandchildren. Jessica appeared beside David, her face flushed with anger. This is harassment, Margaret. You can't just stalk us like this. My eyebrows rose slightly. Stalk you? Jessica, I live next door. In my own home. That I purchased with my own money. That afternoon, David returned alone, his anger replaced by confusion, and something that might have been respect. Mom, how did you afford this place? I gestured for him to sit down in Walter's old recliner, the one piece of furniture that truly felt like home. David, when you pay off someone's mortgage, you learn quite a lot about property values and neighborhood dynamics. Did you know that this street has appreciated an average of 8% annually for the past 5 years? David shook his head, clearly lost. The Henderson house needed some cosmetic work, but the structure is identical to yours. I paid $147,000 cash. About $40,000 under market value because Eleanor and Bill Henderson wanted a quick sale to get settled in Florida. I pulled out a folder of real estate comparisons. Your house, now that it's mortgage-free, is worth approximately $195,000. This house, with some minor updates, will be worth the same within 6 months. David stared at the documents, beginning to understand that his mother wasn't the financially naive widow he'd assumed me to be. But Mom, don't you see how this looks? How uncomfortable this makes things. I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in months. Uncomfortable for whom, David? I'm simply living in my own home, in a neighborhood I can afford, close to my grandchildren. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should ask yourself why. The real revelation came 3 days later when Emma and Tyler discovered my proximity. I was working in my front garden when the school bus dropped them off. Grandma! Emma screamed, dropping her backpack and running across the lawn. You live here now? Tyler was right behind her, launching himself into my arms with the pure joy that only children can express. I sure do, my darlings. I live right next door, where I can see you every day. Can we come visit? Can we have pancakes again? Can you help me with my science project? Emma's questions tumbled out in a rush of excitement. From her kitchen window, Jessica watched the reunion with a mixture of irritation and something that might have been guilt. She'd underestimated how much the children had bonded with their grandmother. Well, you'll have to ask your parents about visiting, I said carefully. But I'll always be right here when you need me. Over the following weeks, I began to understand the true power of my position. I maintained my property immaculately, fresh flowers, perfectly trimmed hedges, a small vegetable garden that attracted admiring comments from other neighbors. Mrs. Patterson from across the street became a regular visitor, often stopping to admire my roses and share neighborhood gossip. The young couple 3 houses down asked for gardening advice. I became a beloved fixture on Maple Street in ways that David and Jessica, despite living there for 4 years, had never achieved. My front porch became an informal community hub. I served lemonade to joggers on hot days, offered my garden hose to neighbors washing cars, and always had a kind word for the children walking to school. David and Jessica, who had always kept to themselves, began to realize how isolated they'd become in their own neighborhood. While I was building relationships and contributing to the community, they remained the aloof couple who never participated in block parties or neighborhood watch meetings. The children, of course, found ways to spend time with me despite Jessica's attempts to limit contact. Emma would accidentally kick her ball into my yard and end up staying for an hour, helping with garden work. Tyler would walk the long way home from the bus stop, stopping to tell me about his day. I was careful never to undermine David and Jessica's authority, but I also didn't turn my grandchildren away when they sought me out. I helped Emma with math homework on the front porch where everyone could see. I taught Tyler to identify different types of birds in my backyard. Soon, other children in the neighborhood began joining Emma and Tyler at my house. My backyard became the informal after-school gathering place, with me providing healthy snacks and gentle supervision while parents finished work. Jessica watched from her kitchen window as her own children chose to spend time with the grandmother she tried to exclude from their lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to get rid of me, she'd made me more central to her children's daily experience than ever before. 6 weeks after moving in, I hosted the monthly neighborhood watch meeting, something David and Jessica had never volunteered to do despite living on the street for 4 years. My living room filled with neighbors discussing community safety, upcoming block parties, and the proposed speed bumps for the street. I served homemade cookies and coffee, taking notes and offering thoughtful suggestions. David and Jessica were notably absent from the meeting, despite receiving an invitation. Their house remained dark while the rest of the neighborhood gathered next door. "Margaret, you've been such a wonderful addition to our street," Mrs. Patterson announced. "It's amazing how much more connected we all feel since you moved in." The young mother from down the street nodded enthusiastically. "Emma and Tyler are so lucky to have you next door. My kids always talk about how kind you are." I smiled graciously, but inside I felt a deep satisfaction. I'd found my place in this community in ways my son never had, despite my supposedly being the outsider. 2 months after my move, David received a disturbing call from his insurance company about renewing his homeowner's policy. "Mr. Williams, we need to discuss the recent changes in your neighborhood dynamics. There have been some complaints from other residents about noise levels and domestic disturbances coming from your property." David was confused. "What complaints? What disturbances?" "Well, sir, there have been reports of shouting matches in your front yard, and several neighbors have mentioned that your property maintenance has been inconsistent compared to other homes on the street." David looked out his window at my immaculate yard, then at his own slightly overgrown grass and flower beds that Jessica never found time to maintain. The insurance agent continued. "Additionally, your home isn't included in the Neighborhood Watch program or community improvement initiatives, which can affect your coverage rates and property values." For the first time, David began to understand that my presence next door wasn't just personally uncomfortable. It was highlighting every way he and Jessica had failed to integrate into their community. The breaking point came when I hosted an end-of-summer garden party. I'd spent weeks planning the event, coordinating with other neighbors, and preparing food for the entire street. My backyard was transformed with string lights, borrowed tables, and enough homemade food to feed 50 people. Children ran between the gardens while adults shared stories and strengthened community bonds. Emma and Tyler moved through the party like little ambassadors, proudly introducing their friends to our grandma and showing off the vegetables they'd helped grow in my garden. David and Jessica watched from their kitchen window as their own neighbors, people they'd lived near for years, celebrated in the backyard next door. Their children were at the center of a community celebration they'd been excluded from, not by my design, but by their own choices. Mrs. Patterson approached the fence separating the yards and called out to David, "You're welcome to join us, you know. Margaret always includes everyone." The emphasis on everyone wasn't lost on David. I had built the inclusive, welcoming community that he and Jessica had never bothered to create. As the evening wound down and neighbors began cleaning up, David finally crossed the invisible boundary between the 2 yards. I was packing leftover food into containers, distributing them to families with young children. "Mom," David said quietly, "can we talk?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in months: humility. "Of course, honey." We sat on my front porch steps, watching Emma help Mrs. Patterson carry folding chairs while Tyler ran around collecting paper plates. "I've been thinking about what you said," David began, "about asking myself why this makes me uncomfortable." I waited, letting my son find his words. "It's not really about you living next door, is it? It's about..." He paused, struggling. "It's about seeing what we threw away." I reached over and patted David's hand. The same hand I'd held when he was learning to walk, to ride a bike, to navigate the complexities of growing up. David, I didn't move here to punish you. I moved here because this is where my family is, and family doesn't give up on each other, even when they give up on family. David watched Emma carefully carrying a tray of leftover cookies to the elderly couple from the corner house, remembering how I had taught her to always share with neighbors. You knew, didn't you? When you bought this house, you knew what would happen. I smiled gently. I knew that living authentically, with love and community spirit, would eventually show the difference between building relationships and taking them for granted. I knew that children need grandparents, and neighbors need each other, and families work best when everyone contributes instead of just taking. For the first time in years, David saw me not as an obligation or burden, but as the strong, wise woman who had raised him with values he'd somehow forgotten along the way. Mom, I'm sorry. We're sorry. Jessica and I. We lost sight of what really matters. I squeezed his hand. I know you are, sweetheart. But sorry isn't enough anymore. I've learned that I can't make people value what I bring to their lives. I can only choose to surround myself with people who do. David understood then that I hadn't just moved next door. I'd moved on. I'd created a new life where my contributions were appreciated, where my love was reciprocated, where I was valued as more than just a convenient helper or financial resource. 3 months after my garden party, a new rhythm had established itself on Maple Street. My morning routine included watering my front garden, waving to neighbors heading to work, and being available when Emma and Tyler walked to the bus stop. I had joined the library book club, started volunteering at the local elementary school, and become the unofficial coordinator for neighborhood improvement projects. My life had a richness and purpose that had been missing during those awkward months in David's house. Emma and Tyler visited me regularly, but naturally, stopping by after school to share their day, helping with weekend garden projects, joining me for Saturday morning pancakes when their parents slept in. The relationship had found its proper balance. Loving, consistent but not replacement parenting. Even Jessica had begun to appreciate aspects of my presence. When Emma struggled with a difficult math concept, Jessica found herself suggesting, "Maybe Grandma could help you with that." When Tyler needed someone to practice reading aloud, Jessica no longer objected to him visiting next door. David, prompted by my example, had started participating in neighborhood activities. He'd joined the weekend cleanup crew and volunteered to help with holiday decorations. It was a small start, but it was a start. What David and Jessica didn't know was the full extent of my financial acumen. 6 months after buying the Henderson house, I met with a financial advisor to discuss my investment strategy. "Mrs. Whitman, your property purchase has already appreciated 12%, the advisor marveled. "The improvements you've made, combined with the neighborhood gentrification, have increased your equity significantly." I nodded knowingly. I researched the area thoroughly. Young professionals are moving in, families are upgrading, and the school district ratings keep improving. This was always going to be a good investment. "Are you considering selling and moving somewhere more age-appropriate?" the advisor asked delicately. I smiled. "Oh no, I'm quite happy where I am. But I am considering purchasing the rental property 2 streets over. It's undervalued, and with some improvements, it would provide excellent rental income." At 72, I had discovered a talent for real estate investment that neither Walter nor I had ever realized I possessed. The skills I'd developed managing a household budget for 43 years translated beautifully to property management and investment strategy. Emma's science fair project, a study of how different soil conditions affect plant growth, won second place in the school competition. She'd conducted the experiment in my garden, with me serving as research mentor and cheerleader. My hypothesis was that plants would grow better in soil with compost, and my grandmother helped me design the experiment to test it. Emma explained to the judges, pointing to me in the audience with obvious pride. I beamed as Emma received her ribbon, remembering how Jessica had once worried about me undermining her parenting. Now Emma was developing scientific thinking skills and learning the value of hard work and patience. Tyler's reading had improved dramatically with my patient, consistent help. He'd progressed from picture books to chapter books, and his teacher had commented on his increased confidence and comprehension. Most afternoons, Tyler could be found on my front porch, reading aloud while I tended my container plants. Neighbors often paused to listen, charmed by the sight of grandmother and grandson sharing stories in the golden afternoon light. My presence had created ripple effects throughout the neighborhood. The Johnsons, a young couple 3 houses down, had started their own vegetable garden after admiring mine. The elderly Mr. Chen from the corner house had begun joining my morning walks. Property values on Maple Street had risen faster than the surrounding area, partly due to the increased sense of community that I had fostered. Real estate agents began marketing the neighborhood as close-knit and family-friendly, attributes that commanded premium prices. David and Jessica found themselves indirect beneficiaries of my community involvement. When their air conditioning failed during a heat wave, 3 neighbors offered spare window units. When Jessica's car broke down, Mrs. Patterson volunteered to drive Emma to dance class. For the first time, Jessica began to understand what I had been trying to create during those months we'd lived together. Not interference, but interconnection. Not judgment, but mutual support. 1 year after my move to Maple Street, I sat on my front porch with my morning coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Mr. Chen waved from his morning walk. The Johnson children ran by, calling out greetings on their way to school. Mrs. Patterson stopped to admire the new roses I had planted. I thought about Walter, about the choices that had led me to this moment. I'd lost my husband, sacrificed my family home, and experienced the pain of my son's ingratitude. But I'd also discovered my own resilience, my ability to create community, and my talent for turning financial sacrifice into investment opportunity. David emerged from his house with his own coffee cup and crossed the yard to join me on my porch, a routine we'd established over recent months. "Morning, Mom. Beautiful day." "It certainly is, honey." We sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma practice cartwheels in the front yard while Tyler attempted to teach the neighbor's dog to sit. "Mom," David said eventually, "I want you to know that I understand now. What you did buying this house, it wasn't about revenge. It was about showing us who we could be." I smiled, patting my son's arm. "David, I've learned that the best gift you can give someone is the opportunity to see themselves clearly. Sometimes that requires a mirror, and sometimes it requires distance. I just happen to provide both." Emma and Tyler came running over, fresh from their morning adventures, climbing onto the porch to share their plans for the day. Jessica appeared in her doorway, coffee in hand, and after a moment's hesitation, crossed the yard to join the family gathering. As I looked around at my son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren gathered on my porch, with neighbors passing by offering waves and friendly greetings, I understood that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about winning or losing. Sometimes they're about creating a life so authentic and fulfilling that others can't help but want to be part of it. I had paid $68,000 to learn who my son really was, but I'd invested $37,000 to show him who he could become. And in the process, I'd discovered who I was meant to be all along. Not just a mother or grandmother, but a cornerstone of community, a woman of wisdom and strength, and an investor in futures that mattered. The house next door had been more than revenge. It had been redemption.